Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you the extra nuggets and tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I'm going to give you a few little nuggets to begin with, and then I'm going to add on a couple of bits that I cut out from both the videos I've done previously today, because it would have made those videos too long. So I cut them out, but it's useful commentary on stuff. So I'm going to tag that on the end. It might not flow as perfectly and as sweetly as my normally masterfully edited videos are. Stream of consciousness, me banging on about stuff that comes into my mind as it comes into my mind. That's how I roll. Jesus, I'm surprised. I'm surprised I've got almost 10,000 followers as it is. Right. Okay. Subscribers, you don't follow me. Well, let's go to the Reaper hit, the downing of the Reaper drone that happened as two Russian jets were, first of all, covering it with fuel. And apparently they did like 19 passes, and on the 20th, I think, or the 19th, they clipped the drone, the propellers on the drone at the back, and the drone went into a spin and fell out of the sky. Now, the Americans have released this footage to show exactly what's happening. So the Russians can't get away from the idea that they clipped this drone. And I'll show you. So here is the footage. So you've got a jet coming in. This is one of the passes. Comes in, starts releasing fuel. And I guess the idea is the fuel and also the propulsion, the drag of the plane as it kind of gets very close to this drone is intended to, well, I suppose they are intending to drop it out the sky. They're not just intending to, I don't know, give it a bit of a rocky ride. They're covering it in fuel to mess around with something on it, so that, well, either it drops out the sky or it can't take video footage, right? So one of those two things. They are intending to mess around with this drone. So that's one pass. And what you can see from this pass is important because every single blade on that propeller is working, is fine, right? You now have another pass, and this one, the plane gets even closer, and yeah, it's considerably close, and it sort of knocks out the video feed. And then I think the video feed, there's a bit of it later, and you have a bent propeller there. And that bent propeller apparently sends it into a tailspin and it drops out of the sky. So I don't think the Russians have got any grounds with which to deny what has happened here. Now, I think the US are correct when they say it's just bad flying, as in they clipped the drone, and I don't think they're meant to clip the drone. That's too dangerous. They're just trying to fly very close because apparently the drag and the turbulence it causes makes it very difficult for the drone to maintain its flight path, or to do what it's supposed to stay in the air, and also dropping the fuel on it is intended to give it some hassle. So there's no doubt the Russians are at least trying to hassle the drone, if not send it out of the sky. How the Americans react to this, as I've said, it remains to be seen. I'm hoping that the best way to react to this is to just up the level of equipment that the Americans are giving to Ukraine. So you mess with us, we'll give ATACMS. You mess with us, we'll give this or that or more of this. And that's what I think might have. There's apparently going to be a military aid package announced again over the next few days from the US. I don't know if that was already in the pipelines or this is something new as a result of this incident. But I don't think escalating it in a tit for tat way, in a right, okay, we're going to hit you now. I think getting involved in outright war, I think that's going to be that would be hugely problematic. And I know some people want America to be that strong. I just don't think that's a sensible option for them. Moving on, let's go back to Dmitry from War Translated. Russians continue revealing details from occupied territories, admitting they bring nothing but chaos. following yesterday's post about cars stolen from military. I haven't seen that one. Another reporter, Romanov, says raiding and stealing of businesses is prevalent. So this post says a bit of reality. I wanted to write this for a while. The situation in the new territories in legal terms is comparable to a grey zone. In essence, these are Russian 1990s on maximum settings. So Russia in the 1990s is me talking. There's obviously quite an interesting time because it come out of the Soviet era. But as a result of that and trying to going towards capitalism, there's a huge amount of corruption and a huge amount of um, dodginess going on. In fact, Putin, arguably, strength. Many people. When I was in Russia getting my stem cell therapy for my multiple sclerosis back in 2019, I remember the Russian driver that drove us around on the 3 days before I had to be remain in the clinic. Got to, I went out for a meal and looked a little bit around Moscow, and he was saying, and I was interested because I'd written quite a lot against Putin by that stage article wise, and he was talking. No, no, Putin's great. I mean, this was, Moscow was dangerous to walk around back 20 years ago, and he's cleaned it all up. And he was like, I think, sort of recognized some of the issues with Putin, but was basically saying Putin's done a really good job of cleaning up, in this case, Moscow, and cleaning up society, so it's just safer and etc. etc. Of course, that says nothing about corruption or these higher scales, but down on the street level, he saw things are better. So this guy says, in essence, these are 1990s on maximum settings, from banal stealing to rather large raiding. Various kinds of newly minted officials go there to fish in troubled waters. There is nothing at all to say about the fate of the budget money poured in there. All this is due to the still too low presence of authorities and a power block. The issue of the quality of personnel is very acute, but in the current conditions, there is simply no one to choose from. Naturally, in the future, the situation will be normalized, but this will happen no earlier than the end of the hostilities. For now, it's kind of like this fog of war, if you will. That's a pretty damning indictment of what life is like, and that's from this Telegram post there, of what life is like in some of these occupied territories, and how the the rule of law is somewhat absent in terms of looting, stealing, what the army gets to do, what goes on in general communities. It seems to be fairly chaotic. Now let's move on to Andrew Perpetua. I've already talked about this in my news bit today. I just wanted to have a little chat about this. This is the idea that Kupol, as a commander, was demoted, and because he had gone public about issues about the number of losses and things, not being as good as they can. Andrew Perpetua, who I've got a lot of time for, said he thought that as a result of bad leadership. And we're watching bad leadership slowly fracture the military. If people weren't allowed to criticize, and things are going to get ugly. Public pressure has to be applied. Yermak and Zelensky are the ones who should be on the chopping block, not competent military leadership. At this point, Ukraine is moving in the most removing its most competent leaders to prop up Zelensky's ego. This isn't the first time, and each time it has backfired and damaged Ukraine's ability to fight in the battlefield. It has to stop. Right. So a bit of background here. I think Andrew Perpetua has interviewed some troops on the front line who have been complaining about certain situations, and so he sees this as getting the correct information out there into the information space, and that should be good and right. And I said this morning, I don't agree. So I think that in the same way as if I slagged off my bosses at work, even in public, going on to social media and or to a newspaper or whatever, even if what I was saying was correct, I yes, there's whistleblowing, but if I'm slagging off their decision making and talking about how the losses of the company are really bad and blah blah blah, then I would expect to be sacked or given some severe reprimanding. If that's happening in the army, then you can definitely foresee that there'll be ramifications, especially at wartime, right? But that's not to say that what the guy was claiming was anyway wrong. I'm just saying that it's really difficult. It's not like the marketplace of ideas out there where everyone can just say what they like, and they've got the freedom to say, "Hey, I've got a problem, and I'm with my command structure in the army, and I'm just going to go onto social media. I'm going to go into to a newspaper. I'm going to shout about that." even if it's true, that you can expect to get demoted for doing that. In fact, you can expect to be court-martialed. So I talked about this earlier in one of my videos. On the thread below, there's a couple of interesting comments that I want to point out. You are correct, Jonathan. An officer who stays within channels can courageously voice a complaint uphill within the military, but cannot go outside. Not sure how the Ukrainian army does it, but generally, an officer can resign his commission, forego all pay and allowances along with his retirement, and only then speak publicly. But in wartime, violating OPSEC will get even a private citizen arrested. One may disagree passionately with the chain of command, but violating orders comes at a price. And I think that's basically what I was saying. What Daniel Tremblay says here, though, as well, is recognition of facts, very difficult work. We ridicule the Russians who are not able to recognize the thefts of their soldiers and the fact that it is immoral, or we do not understand that Russians do not recognize that their armies have a lot of failures, lack of ammunition, poorly equipped soldiers, repetition of the same mistakes, etc., etc. We applaud and say that the pro-Russian dissident Gherkin is telling the truth about the Russian army. If we take the case of Andrew, my question for you, Jonathan, is how should we react when the facts do not suit us, and we know that omitting them will have negative impacts on the cause we love? Am I playing the ostrich and putting my head in the sand, hiding the facts? Should the principles of truth and clarity be set aside in times of war for the greater purpose of winning the war against what is considered evil? I have no answer. If you have time, I would like your opinion. Such a cool question. Thanks, Daniel Tremblay. So this is almost philosophical and may employ something like consequentialism, which is that morality is evaluated in the consequences an action obtains. So the moral value of an action is what comes about from that action. You can talk about intentions, you can talk about desired versus actual consequences, and it gets all rather complicated. But here, there's lots of things going on. So I think for the intents and purposes of a functioning armed forces command structure, you violating the norms and complaining in public is counterproductive, and I would see that as being problematic, and that guy's rightfully demoted. But it might be useful that that information gets out, right? So how do you get that information out? You get an awful lot of people nowadays with modern technology being able to anonymously present these facts to the world, right? All these claims to the world. So what he did was wrong, but he probably could have done the same thing in a different way, which is to say, posting on social media or being an anonymous source in an article so that the information gets out there and the army can react to this knowledge. But essentially, what did this commander want to happen? He wants things to change. So is this the best way to get change happening? I don't know. But I can understand why he's been demoted. Has he exhausted all the ways that he can do that internally, which is taking his complaints to the officers or seeking out, communicating, even if it is anonymously, with those decision makers further up the chain? So if he's not getting anywhere with complaining to his immediate command, has he taken those complaints and delivered them somehow to the command structure further up? I don't know. I don't know what the options are. There are probably lots of other options that would be available to him that would mean he wouldn't get demoted, and that perhaps this information doesn't get in the public's information space where it can do damage to the Ukrainians through being used as propaganda by the Russians against the Ukrainians. But if he has truths that warrant and are justified in being outed, then but yet outing them justifiably gets him demoted, then there is evidently a tension going on there. There is no definite answer, but what you would want is those decision makers, garbage in, garbage out, those decision makers at the top to have the correct information. And if he feels they're not getting the correct information from the ground, that he's losing these troops, that this is a situation, and if they knew that, then they would make better decisions. Then he needs to work out a way of getting that information to those top decision makers, and preferably in a way that doesn't do damage to the Ukrainian army, and in a way that preferably doesn't do damage to his own position. So he gets that information to the decision makers in a way that they get that. It's not out in the public space. The decision the future decisions are adapted as a result of having that information. And there you go. What do we do? Well, I'm in a sector of disseminating that information, kind of irrespective. I really want Ukraine to prevail in this war, but also I think it's useful to have the correct information. And then there's a tension for me is like, well, do I spread the correct information, truthful information, even if it damages Ukraine's chances going forward, or the Russians can use it as propaganda against Ukraine? And those are those kind of moral dilemmas that I'm faced with. But I'm really, I don't have a command structure, and I'm not in the armed forces where it's well known that if I go outside and violate the kind of norms and practices, then I'm going to get sacked. So I am personally more up for disseminating the truth, no matter what that truth is. But this is the age old. In fact, I've written a chapter in one of my books on. Uh, in fact, let's go and see what that chapter is called. So the chapter is, can there be very strong reasons for believing something although it is false? And that's the idea that is it good to believe something that's false? Is it good to spread information even if it's false? Does the truth of a piece or does the truth of any information, is that the most important thing, or is it what the information or the claims brings about? There's that consequentialist thinking, which is if the consequences of believing a falsehood are positive, then it's worth believing or spreading that falsehood. And of course, it depends on what your goals are. So if your goals are Ukraine winning the war, right? You can imagine a situation, or any side winning any war. You can imagine that there might be a situation where spreading false information is beneficial to that end goal, and therefore morally the right thing to do, or practically the right thing to do in that given situation, even though it's false. But spreading that gets you gains. I mean, that's basically the information space. That's fifth generation warfare. That's propaganda. That's exactly how it works, which is spreading false information for a political or war gain. In philosophy, then some might say that truth doesn't have intrinsic value, doesn't have value in and of itself. Truth isn't either good or bad. It has extrinsic value. So truth is only as good as what it obtains. The idea might be that a society that adheres to truth and accurate information is more likely to flourish and more likely to be better in the long run, as a rule of thumb, but it might not be the case in every individual instance. Does your bum look big in that? Does my bum look big in this? No, no. That little white line might have like a right, rather than going, yeah, it looks massive. Your ass looks massive in that. I just maybe that truth might be beneficial. Maybe she wouldn't wear it, and whatever. So you can argue about these individual instances where, like, telling the truth might not be a good idea, and war might be an example here whereby using propaganda, using disinformation might bring about beneficial gains in a particular context, rather than being brutally honest at every conceivable point, and letting everyone in the army know, oh, we're up against it, guys, we're probably all going to die. You've only got a 3% chance of dying in this next offensive that we're going to do. It's like that kind of brutal honesty is going to destroy their morale, and they're a lot likely to do it, and it's going to be counterproductive. So in other words, truth is something that's utilized. It is a necessary thing in and of itself in terms of its value. So these are kind of conversations I have in my head about, well, is me telling people that Ukraine have done really badly in this situation, is that counterproductive for the war effort for Ukraine? But then what about my dedication to accurate and truthful information dissemination? So yeah, anyway, moral dilemmas. But these are the stuff I love to think about. Great question, thanks, and some really great comments on this topic in the threads. Anyway, now on to stuff I'd recorded earlier. This I find interesting. So it says towards the end, the Ukrainian General Staff reported on March 16th that the equipment inside Russian T-90M tanks, so these are their best tanks that they use. These are newest tanks, at least. Some will argue about what's the best, depends what kit they have inside. But inside the T90M that have been captured in September 2022 indicates that Russia places its markings on imported electronics within tanks to mask the fact that it does not produce electronics for its own tanks. And so here we have the breakthrough, a T90 breakthrough disassembled. So they've actually, looked at a whole bunch of stuff in these T90s and found out that, it's not Russian, it's not indigenous Russian components. They just put their own markings on stuff made outside. So that means that during these times of sanctions, of course, they don't have an industry that makes this kind of stuff. They are relying on imports from outside, and that's particularly difficult. So the Ukrainian general staff added that the Russian forces only have 100 T90M tanks remaining, and increasingly rely on T62 and T72 tanks. So we heard recently that in the Kremlin area, they've kind of gone through a bunch of T90s that they threw into the area, and they're back to using their T72s. The T62 and 72s tanks and sometimes use the engines from 1937 B2 and B92S2 model tanks. It's not looking good at a time when Ukraine are looking to get upgraded. I keep mentioning this. The Russians are being degraded and have fewer tanks of worse kind of provenance and uh, arguably worse kit inside, although they are upscaling some of them in a factory in Russia at the moment. Don't know how many they're able to produce each day. They are getting at least. I saw some information earlier on today about some of them having era like explosive reactive armor put on them to different degrees, and there's at least some thermals or imagery optics are going inside them. It's going to be interesting to see where they would be put against, say, Leopard 1. Are these like for like, even though these are older tanks, the T62, T72, are they getting upscaled enough? I don't know. But anyway, it appears incontrovertible that Russia are being degraded and Ukraine are being upgraded. Of course, Ukraine is still losing a lot of equipment themselves, but Russia appear to be losing equipment at a higher rate and don't have the ability to have it replaced. They don't have 50 allies trying to get together to give them as much stuff as they can. They have maybe Iran, have maybe China, but China are really tentative in what they can do or what they're trying to do, given that they've got a very difficult, precarious path to navigate. Because if they get too involved militarily, they could end up being sanctioned, and that would have huge ramifications. So I think it's, as I keep saying, it's good news going forward for Ukraine, but it's a long, protracted war ahead of them, and the counteroffensives might not be lightning quick, or almost certainly won't be lightning quick like we saw in Kharkiv. It's more likely to be methodical, having to clear out defenses and move on in a slow and methodical way, and it will be attritional as well for them as much as for the Russians. So it's going to be a tough 6 months ahead. But again, where's it going? I don't know that unless China really do come and help them with a lot of equipment, Russia have got nowhere to go, and they've got no capacity to throw at this war other than mobilize troops. And I don't think they can solve uh, Russia's mounting problems. But if you disagree, let me know in the threads below. Anyway, interesting analysis by a German journalist in a German online publication. Russia is being attrited at such a rate that they may collapse before the end of the year, assuming the West delivers in time what we promised. War is a test of will and a test of logistics. So this is a German piece that I have done the Google Translate for. There's again, it depends whether these figures are trustworthy and so on and so forth. Garbage in, garbage out. But there's an interesting analysis here. I'll just dip into a few bits of this. This is why typically an attacker must outnumber the defender at least 3-1. In house-to-house fighting, this relationship must turn out even more clearly in favor of the attacker if the plans are to lead to success. So talking about Bakhmut, you're going to need more than 3-1. Do the Russians have 3-1? Probably not. Are they losing a lot? Yes, they are. Yes, the defenders are arguably losing a lot as well, but that calculation appears to be made. in favor of remaining in Bakhmut because the defenders use the urban infrastructure. Snipers lie in wait in higher buildings. Ambushes can be set up in streets. This is also the reason why the Russian artillery fired on Bakhmut so much before. So they wanted to shoot the city ready for a storm. As it goes on, the battles for Bakhmut thus illustrate what war of attrition means in reality, says the interviewer. Yes, the current situation in Bakhmut particularly symbolizes this fact. A look at the numbers makes this clear. In order to take the city, the Russian leadership sends out battalions in mindless frontal attacks. They don't just do this, though. The units are quickly shot up. If they lose a battalion every day, they have to get replacements. But from where? So this is the key. So other parts of the front are being thinned out. Just to classify the geographical area we're talking about, the front section in Bakhmut is 20 kilometers long, but the entire front from Kherson to Kharkiv is over 1,000 kilometers long. The dogged onslaught of the Russian units no longer has anything to do with military rationality. Um, uh, uh, and he goes on to say later, the war will probably be over in October. Expected, I come to this conclusion based on simple calculations. If you add up what Russia had in serviceable tanks and other military vehicles, and there's new figures out to say they've lost over 1,825 tanks, I think. I also have the impression that if you add up what Russia had in serviceable tanks and other military vehicles before the war and put that in relation to the wear and tear, I also have the impression that the Russian reserves are extremely overestimated. A lot of material comes from the 1950s and 60s, which looks good on paper but has no operational value. Of course, the Russians can repair old tanks, but then they have to compete against Leopard and Challenger. From then on, the Ukrainians have an easy time. I guess easier said than done, but the general point is what I've been saying all along, which is the Ukrainians are getting upgraded all the time and being given newer kit and better kit, and the Russians are being downgraded all the time. They're being degraded. They have no way, short of China stepping in a meaningful way, and we'll talk a little bit about that soon. They have no way of upgrading their army and their kit, and so it does look like the direction of travel is one way here, as painful as it may be in that process. Before the war, Russia was able to produce around 100 main battle tanks per year, albeit under better economic conditions. However, at the current attrition rate of 5 tanks per day of combat, they would need to produce 1,500 tanks per year to even out the attrition alone. In addition, Western main battle tanks will soon appear on the battlefields. This will once again fundamentally change the situation in Ukraine's favor. Western main battle tanks can shoot down Russian ones from a distance. With this fighting power, the Ukrainians will split the Russian front. Then it will be quite dramatic for the Russian troops because the Ukrainian army will systematically attack their supplies. Russia's army is pretty much bare. There's nothing left to get. The border with Finland, Kaliningrad, even the Far East is bared. Everything that Russia has in terms of operational material is in Ukraine. There will come a point where the front will just collapse like it did in World War One. Russia has now used more than 60% of its artillery ammunition, which is why it's now holding back. And then the question is, in view of this shortage, is there a possibility the Russian army will go all in one card again, as long as there are any vehicles and ammunition left? I don't think that's likely. Russia is a great Potemkin village that has successfully tricked the West into believing that it is strong and powerful. Anyone who has looked at the country outside of the glittering metropolises of Moscow and St. Petersburg will get an idea, but only a few Western politicians have ever ended up there. So there's analysis that says it will, it's not looking good for Russia. The flip side is it's also tough for Ukraine, right? Ukraine are making big losses. And will they have enough equipment? I mean, they need more than enough equipment in order to have successful counter offensives. These are going to be tough. There's going to be huge amounts of defenses to contend with, mines, etc., etc. So I think this is your really positive outlook for Ukraine, but we shall see. Thank you for watching that melange of musings. I congratulate you for your patience and putting up with me. Thank you. I will be doing my videos as per usual tomorrow. Fingers crossed. Don't know what the timings because it's Saturday, although timings today have been a bit weird. But thank you. Please like, subscribe, and share if I can actually get my words out. And all the ways you can support the channel are in the description below. Really appreciated. Speak soon.